Oh, 250cc Suzuki. Air cooled. Got about as much horsepower as a horse. I think it's around 20, 19 or something like that. But it's cute. It's super stylish. It really is. In most of the world, a 400cc motorcycle is big, and a 650 is huge. Ride one of these in one of the rich Western countries, especially in Canada or the United States where big Harleys are still king, and you'll get nice starter bike. What are you going to trade it up for when you get more experience? And I fell into that mindset myself when I was first getting into motorcycling in 1999. I was told that there's no replacement for displacement, and so my first bike after getting my license on a rented 250 was the Suzuki Intruder 1400, which I dropped on the first day I owned it. Fortunately, there was no damage done either to me or the bike, and I smartened up after that, but looking back now, I was over my head. I had no dirt biking experience, and this huge torquey V-twin was a lot of bike for a noob. Fortunately, I survived. Incidentally, I later got a 600cc Super Sport and found out that there is a replacement for displacement. It's called Revs, but that's another video. Western riders have been caught up in a bigger is better mentality for some time, despite moto journalists continually pointing out the advantages of lighter, high-quality motorcycles. But it wasn't until the last few years that we finally started to pay attention. And we seem to be having a resurgence of interest in smaller, high-quality bikes, especially in the adventure and touring segments. So what is driving this trend and why is it good for motorcycling? Stay tuned. And if you're enjoying the content, please consider subscribing, liking the video, and sharing it with friends. First of all, this obsession with displacement is strictly a Western phenomenon. Everywhere else, a 250cc motorcycle is large. But in the West, and especially in North America where fast highways are the norm, we have somehow gotten the idea that we should be able to cruise at 80 miles per hour or 130 kilometers per hour, powered by an engine turning over at sub 3000 RPM. It wasn't always this way. Harley motors were always big, but when Honda first hit the US market, it was selling 70 and 90cc motorcycles in droves. Very quickly though, the company ramped up to the 4-cylinder 750cc CB750, and then the Goldwing, which started out as a 1000cc flat 4. And while there were plenty of sub 500cc bikes like the first Silverwing Tourer, they were always considered small by Western standards. And over the years, all of these bikes grew. The Goldwing is now 1800cc, Harley Big Twins, which used to be 1340cc when I started riding, are closing in on 2000, and you now have bikes like the Ducati Desert X, a 110 horsepower 937cc V-twin, which is being called mid-sized while costing $18,000 US. And it is precisely the cost of these bikes which is causing a snapback, especially in the adventure bike market. We've gotten some really nice adventure bikes lately in the 400 to 450cc range. Motorcycles like the KTM 390 Adventure R, Royal Enfield Himalayan, and CF Moto MT450 are raising the stakes in this segment with evidence that Kawasaki and BMW are about to jump in with their own 450cc offerings. And while small bikes have always been around, these new ones are no longer afterthoughts with wheezy motors which can barely hold highway speeds. These are serious performance motorcycles, which in many circumstances are superior to the flagship bikes these same companies sell. And as I said, prices are at the forefront of the reason these motorcycles are so popular. With the enormous amount of inflation blowing up everywhere you look, something that is inexpensive as well as nice becomes mighty tempting. Young people are getting squeezed these days, especially by the crazy housing costs, and even if they'd like to own a big 150 horsepower road missile, they can't afford one. But they can afford to buy and insure a sub 500cc motorcycle. And with the quality and improved performance of these new entry-level motorcycles, they have access to serious fun without getting into massive debt. Overall, this new class of high-performance smaller bikes are good for motorcycling because they get young riders into the sport, which increases motorcycling's profile. The more people who ride, the more of their friends are exposed to it, the more of them will take it up. More riders means more citizens voting for motorcycle-friendly laws like lane splitting, more advocacy groups, and more power for the motorcycling community as a whole. This is why I'm always excited to welcome all sorts of folks to the sport, no matter what they ride. And these light bikes, despite being more powerful and torquey than their predecessors, are still relatively easy to ride. They are easier to push around, easier to maneuver in a parking lot, and easier to pick up if dropped. This is good for new young riders, but also for older ones. I often get comments from older folks who are getting back into the sport and are happy to pick up something other than an 800+ pound bagger, which they find intimidating. And some of those who are currently riding baggers and are getting older are finding that they are less able to deal with these huge machines. They might opt for a smaller bike like the Honda Rebel 1100T, which offers all of the performance at 60% of the weight and less than half the price. And aside from handling these bikes in slower situations or having to back them into a parking spot, smaller motorcycles, despite generally having inferior suspension, can often outperform the big bikes in situations that involve skill. Because as fun as it is to whack open the throttle on a 200 horsepower bike and feel your eyeballs slam into the back of your skull, blasting around at hyperspeeds gets old fast. Yes, it's cool to pass a dozen cars on a 2-lane in one go, but there's no skill involved in riding fast in a straight line. Eventually it gets boring and can cost you your license if you're caught doing the kinds of speeds the big bikes are capable of. One thing that I found out over the years is that there's not a direct correlation between power and fun. The real fun is in testing and expanding your skills, and that can only be achieved on twisty paved roads or serious gnarly off-road terrain. And here's where the smaller machines shine. Whether it's on a twisty road or a tight racetrack, my guess is that the average rider, and especially new riders, will go faster on a Ninja 500 than on an H2, despite the fact that the H2 has more than 4 times the power. Lighter bikes allow for greater flickability, and less power smooths the acceleration, especially for less experienced riders. Riding a very powerful bike in the twists is like walking a tightrope. It can be terrifying trying to judge how fast you're approaching the corner on a crotch rocket. On the other hand, a less powerful bike allows the rider to worry less about weight and warp speed and work on their cornering technique. Ironically, this means that often the slower bike will go faster because of increased rider confidence. It really is more fun riding a slow bike fast than a fast bike slow. But the biggest difference in performance between big and small bikes really lies off-road. On dirt, having more than 40 horsepower for the average rider is useless. A hindrance, in fact, because unless you're super skilled, you can't exploit the power effectively. Personally, off pavement, I'd take a 390 Adventure R over a 1290 Adventure R every day of the week. Yes, the 1290 can look boss in the commercials, but that's under an elite rider. No way I'm riding a 1290 like that. The 390, on the other hand, is light and unintimidating enough to legit ride some seriously gnarly single track. I guess my views on this are clear. If you're traveling across North America on the freeway, then a bagger or a big ADV or sport tourer is awesome. But you don't have to break the bank to have a great touring or riding experience. I'd be perfectly happy touring cross-country on a Triumph Tiger 660 Sport Tourer or even one of the KTM 390s. And for shorter local rides, smaller bikes might actually be better as they are easier to handle on tighter roads and definitely off-road. Personally, I spend most of my time on the highway in a car, while my motorcycle time happens almost exclusively on the most remote, least crowded roads around. That's where the real fun is to be found. Small motorcycles have always been around, but this is the first time I've seen manufacturers really take care to devote similar amounts of R&D to them as they do to the big bikes. And as a guy who owns 2 motorcycles that add up to 938cc combined, basically one Ducati Desert X mid-sized bike in air quotes, I'm super happy. And I'm looking forward to seeing more of these on the road. But what do you think? Big or small bike for you? Which smaller bikes have piqued your interest lately? Please feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments below. Ride safe, check out these other videos which may be of interest to you, and may the spokes be with you.